Afternoon, Kathryn.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. It's not actually been very long since we met face to face.
No, and I'm missing the weekend already. It was the best day.
We did have a lovely time, didn't we, in London, seeing License to Kill at the Prince Charles Cinema and having some drinks, and it was nice to get to know lots of Bond people face to face, but especially yourself, because we met up a little bit earlier than most people, didn't we? And we kind of got to know a bit more about each other. So that was lovely. So it's almost like this is trying to recreate our first conversation from
we need
Saturday.
A glass of champagne in order to do that, don't we?
Well, we do need. Well, we didn't have a glass of champagne, actually, did we? We had a glass of.
We didn't,
because the Bollinger Bar wasn't open at 11 a.m. So we had to go to the pub around the corner and have prosecco out of a plastic cup because their glass washer had broken. Yeah. So not the Bond lifestyle necessarily, but we made the best of it. Not
quite. We definitely made the best of it.
Absolutely. Now, as I'm sure listeners will already have kind of had a similar thought process going on in their heads as I did when I first met you on the weekend, around your voice, because you have a very, very distinctive voice, which I'd heard some of in some of your work previously before meeting you, but in person it's even more I'm just trying to think of the right word. It's more the best I can think of is it's more Lauren Bacall than I was expecting it to be. So that's my frame of reference.
Well, so that's a great compliment. Thank you.
Talk to us about your voice, because I know I think you used the phrase money maker.
It is my money maker. It is. For the last few years, at least, it's been my money maker. I've been working full-time as a voiceover actor and voiceover artist, and it's just the best. I get to voice video games, commercials, audio books, audio dramas, all sorts of things. Yeah, it's the best.
And so you started in the industry, in the biz, as it were, as you're a trained camera operator. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. My degree's in film production and cinematography, and then I worked out of London for several years as a camera trainee operator, various roles within camera departments in all sorts of things. Yeah.
And you tried the 9 to 5, like many of us, because many of us fit our creative work around the 9 to 5, but 9 to 5 wasn't your bag, was it?
Not at all. I think I lasted about 2 years, and then I needed to get out. So I quit and started doing my voiceover work basically full-time from the get-go.
Wow.
Yeah.
So any Bond projects on the horizon that you can talk about publicly to do with? I'm not, you alluded to things with me, but are you allowed to share those?
I'm afraid I can't. I don't specifically have any Bond related projects on the horizon, I'm sad to say, though I will say the life of a voiceover artist is a little bit secretive in so much as you sign so many NDAs for projects that you work on. You often can't speak about projects until they're released. I suppose the closest I've come to any kind of Bond connection would be my work with Anthony Horowitz. I voiced the last 2 commercials on ITV for his last 2 books, Moonflower Murders and A Line to Kill. So that's the closest I've come to crossing paths with the Bond universe so far. Of course, I'm going to do all I can to make sure I can find a way of wiggling my way into that universe somehow.
It's honestly, your voice is so distinctive. I know you must hear that all the time, that it definitely fits within the world of Bond.
Well, thank you very much. That's the best thing anyone could say.
It's got that mystique, definitely. So in terms of your own Bond history, so tell us all about that.
Well, I grew up watching Bond, like many. I've got a real soft spot for Roger Moore. I think I watched Live and Let Die hundreds of times growing up, along with The Man with the Golden Gun. And I did see other other iterations of Bond, you know, Sean Connery and Timothy Dalton, but I think for me it was Roger Moore when I was growing up. But then when I discovered On Her Majesty's Secret Service, that was the first time I was watching a Bond film and I was completely disinterested in Bond because of somebody else on screen. And that was my introduction to Dame Diana Rigg, which changed so much for me in my life in the grand scheme of things.
So we may have already given this away because I'll have entitled this episode of the podcast the sentence which you came out with. So I think I'd only got to know you for about 10 minutes on Saturday, and you said this sentence, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is a story in itself. So
yes.
so go for it.
In a nutshell, Dame Diana Rigg helped me realize I wasn't straight. I mean, what a beautiful introduction to the world of appreciating womankind. To be having the lovely Diana Rigg.
I'm sure you are not alone on that front. I know many, you know, as you know, I identify as gay, but I know many gay men who would, you know, make an exception for Diana Rigg. And yes, certainly some of the License to Queer contributors who identify as gay would agree with me on that one. So talk to us about what it was like seeing that absolute queen on screen for the first time.
Well, I think what's lovely about the character of Tracy is that when you first meet her, she isn't especially likable. She's just cold. She's not, she does look beautiful, but everybody looks beautiful because it's Bond. Yeah. And what you get to see is this woman soften and find space in her life to allow someone like James Bond in. And not only that, but she does such a good job of being this attractive, gracious, fascinating woman that she becomes the woman that Bond wants to marry, the woman that this misogynistic dinosaur, as I think M describes him in one of the later films, wants to pack up his bed hopping ways and settle down. And I just thought that was incredible. It brought out an entire new side of Bond. And because James Bond was a character that I knew of and was a fan of and was very familiar with his ways, as anyone is, to then watch this woman come in and transform who he is to himself, there's so much power in that, and there's such an authenticity in their relationship. I know some people have mixed feelings about On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and I know George Lazenby isn't for the most popular of Bonds in the grand scheme of the canon, but there's a real chemistry to their connection on screen, and you really believe in it. You're never left feeling that it's just for show or you're just watching two actors. And that just gave it such an authenticity. But then, of course, there's the shot where Bond is at the ice rink and he's trying to escape. He's just left Blofeld's lair and found his way down the mountain on the skis with that amazing ski sequence with some of the best work John Barry has ever done in soundtrack. And there's a moment where he's kind of alone, but you feel his vulnerability and he's isolated.
Yes.
And then suddenly she appears, but there's the slow reveal. This is going to sound pervy, but the tracking shot
the legs
up to this radiant face. And it's just, oh, my heart, just such an incredible moment. You can't not fall in love with her.
Did you ever get to recreate that shot as a camera operator?
No, I did not. But my goodness, I think I need to recreate that shot just in life, let alone as a camera operator.
You'll hear no dissenting views about On Her Majesty's Secret Service here, as you well know, and many regular listeners will know. It's always in my top 5. It's never going to leave the top 5, no matter how many other Bond films get released. Something else will have to make way if there is something brilliant that comes out. And I think Diana Rigg is a humongous part of that. I know some people say that it's more her film than his, which I don't necessarily agree with, but she's so memorable in every single scene that she's in.
And it's the fact that it's a Bond film where you've got a bevy of Bond girls up in Blofeld's lair, up at Piz Gloria, and somehow there's space within her performance to steal the show from so many women including the early career of Joanna Lumley. It's
Yes.
amazing. You've got some really iconic women who are for Blofeld's big old experiment in the mountains, and yet somehow she's the most memorable woman in all of it.
That is quite a feat, isn't it, really? Because it's become a bit of a staple of the Bond series to have a range of women. I remember that promotional shot from For Your Eyes Only around the swimming pool. So they're used in the publicity and the marketing, but to have so many prominent female characters in a film, and then you really do need a special quality to stand out. And obviously Diana Rigg had that special quality. What do you think do you just like Diana Rigg as Tracy, or are you a fan of Diana Rigg more generally in her other work?
Well, you know, for years I was just a fan of Diana Rigg as Tracy, and then in my as I've got a film degree and been working in the industry, I've been wanting to learn more about her career. I mean, I just saw her in her final cinematic performance of Last Night in Soho, and she's exceptional in it. She's completely exceptional.
I have to see that film. It's got isn't it got a Bond reference? Is it Thunderball on the marquee? I have to get around, especially as we're walking around Soho on Saturday. We're, like we always do when we go to these screenings. I have to actually watch Last Night in Soho.
Yeah, no, she's fantastic in it. I mean, I think just regardless of whether you have a massive crush on her as I do or not, her body of work and her commitment to being a working actor. She didn't just cash some checks early on in her career after her huge success in the new Avengers, in the Avengers and in on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and then just resign herself to doing small projects when she felt like it. She was working right the way up to her death. She was recording ADR, so pick up audio, for Last Night in Soho from her bed as she was dying. That's how strong she is. That's how committed she was to her work. And I think when you take away the beauty of youth that she had in her 20s, 30s, I mean, she was gorgeous all the way through her life. But even when you take away the more superficial reasons to admire her, just as a performer, there's so much you can take from her strength and tenacity in her work. It's amazing.
I totally agree with absolutely everything you've just said. Have you ever watched the series of The Avengers where she was in that?
Yes. Yes,
I haven't seen every episode, but we started watching them about a year or so ago. And oh my Lord, she's spectacular in that. You can totally see why they cast. She did that before Bond, didn't she? And then she was cast.
Yeah, she left to do Bond. I mean, that's the weird thing about the Avengers, though, because that's exactly what happened to Honor Blackman, because she was the original female sidekick and then left to do Goldfinger. So there was a bit of a and then of course Joanna Lumley, who was in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, went on to be in the new Avengers. So it's just a canon of Bond girls all connected with the Avengers.
Yeah, absolutely. So you identify as bisexual, that's correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I know we had a long conversation about labels and to do with sexual orientation and gender and everything at the weekend, but sometimes labels can kind of, they can work in our favor, they can be comforting. Other times they're a bit of a pain in the backside. But you identify, so we're still a minority within a minority, I feel, queer Bond fans. I know that the last couple of years after I've started Licensed to Queer as raised visibility of us. And that was one of the things that I wanted to do from the outset. But have you ever, because we talked at the weekend about how I felt for a couple of years that there was no place for me within the Bond community. Have you ever kind of had that feeling as well at any point?
I will say I don't think I've ever felt isolated as a Bond fan, as a bisexual, because when you're watching Bond films, so many people are there to be attractive. So many characters are written for the audience to find them attractive. So I suppose the only thing is that when you're watching a Bond film, you are aware that you're being presented with men who you could see as someone to objectify, someone to fall for, but you're equally being presented with women as someone to objectify and someone to fall for. And I feel like even though in sort of the Sean Connery era and even in the later decades, these films were not being written with women in mind. They were being written for a male audience. They are still primarily being written for a male audience.
Yeah.
But you were still given permission to ogle at James Bond himself. It's not that they were just making the women scantily clad and gorgeous. There are enough shots of James Bond rolling around in very little or in tightly fit polo necks to get everyone's attention. And I think there's been a certain openness to the idea of a confident sort of sexuality with so many characters within the Bond canon that it's quite an open space for members of the queer community to discover what they like.
I think that's incredibly insightful, because a lot of times, you're right, it's a presumed straight male audience. And I'm aware I'm talking to a camera operator, and I don't know how familiar, we didn't talk about this when we met the other day, but you're probably familiar, you're far more qualified to talk about this sort of stuff than I am. I'm just an amateur when it comes to things like, Laura Mulvey's gaze theory, the idea that, because most people who make films will, including camera operators, will linger on the feminine form because they're straight men and that's what they want to do, and they're kind of maybe mixing work and pleasure. But at the same time, I believe the Bond series has always had a gaze which is more inclusive, more encompassing than that. And you're absolutely right. When I was doing Dr. No in detail last year, there were so many moments which I'd completely forgotten, where it is basically Sean Connery who's centrally framed, and then Ursula Andress who's off to the side. But the main focus of our gaze is Sean's body, chest hair, as you said, tight polo shirt.
Totally.
And a lot of people, I think, just overlook those moments.
Yeah, I think so, because we go into Bond films with a stereotype in mind. The James Bond is the one who does the action, and the Bond girl is there to be the sexual intrigue, and you'll get to see a sex scene with that gorgeous Bond girl, and she'll finally take her dress off. And that's part of the appeal. But at the same time, like you say, there are enough shots where you're given full permission to ogle at Bond as much as you are anybody else. And let's not forget how attractive some of these villains are as well. It's not just a clear-cut thing of only finding the good guys attractive.
Do you feel represented though in the Bond series? Because I'm racking my brains for bisexual characters. And there aren't many queer identifying characters anyway. Even Winton Kidd technically never say they're gay, even though they hold hands and they're clearly in a relationship. So they're very heavily coded as such, and I don't know how anyone could interpret them otherwise. But
I mean, I've always hoped that Pussy Galore is bisexual. I've always hoped that her troupe of female flying pilots are a little more than friends. I've always that might just be wishful thinking. Certainly in the era that it was written, it was never meant to be seen as that, because there was no acknowledgement of anything other than straightness really in the 60s, certainly not in the Bond era. I don't feel represented. No, I feel like as an audience member, I'm given permission to be allowed to feel whatever I want to feel while I'm watching these gorgeous people be gorgeous, regardless of gender. But there aren't any queer characters. The fact that we've had so many progressive years of Daniel Craig's era of Bond, and we've seen the central character of James Bond really break down these ideas of toxic masculinity. We've seen him become outdated within the context of the world that he operates in and the way that he sees society and sees gender. So we've seen him go through all that change, and it's been phenomenal. It's been a beautiful way of exploring this character. And yet every single woman that he's met in a bar has been nothing but straight. And that's insane. That's actually insane. It's not like he's just going to the leafy shires of the UK, where that culture is a little more hidden. He's always in the capital cities of these of countries where there's a huge LGBTQI plus presence. So the idea that the amount of drinking he does, the amount of frequenting of bars and going to new locations and travel, the idea that he hasn't happened to come across someone who's interested in both, or fully a lesbian, God forbid. The idea that he might meet a woman who isn't solely interested in him. Yeah.
And yeah, one of the things I, again, completely agree, but one of the things I've noticed over the last couple of years as I've been doing the website is that increasingly the marketing, I think probably from License to Kill onwards, throughout the Brosnan era, and then it sort of petered out with Daniel Craig, they tend to feature Bond, and in the marketing imagery, they tend to feature Bond flanked by the women, and sometimes the women on their own, in quite sexually suggestive positions. So especially I'm just trying to remember, Talisa Soto and Carey Lowell in License to Kill, and then you had Isabella Scorupco and Famke Janssen in Goldeneye. So they did pose the actresses in positions which would suggest to a assumed straight male audience for who two women into each other is a thing. But at the same time, that could work for a bisexual lesbian woman looking at that imagery. I'm not sure that they didn't do that intentionally, but as with so much of the stuff I've been exploring, it just happens to have worked for people who don't identify as straight men.
Absolutely. No, you're right. It's definitely an incidental positive. It's something that no one really set out to do. I doubt there were meetings in the 1990s of how can we get the lesbians to love this? No, that wouldn't have happened. That probably barely happens now. But the way that it's just, again, this openness to more explicit sexuality, or sexualization, I should say, more explicit sexualization of these characters.
Yeah.
I will say it's been pleasant to see in the Daniel Craig era that the marketing around all of his films have not relied so heavily on just the women being scantily clad. And Daniel Craig has had his own moment of coming out of the water wearing very little and it being gorgeous. So they've done a reasonable amount. But I'm still not this particularly impressed with how far they have come, because there's so much more they could have done.
I totally agree, and I'm currently doing a lot of research around the Skyfall and Spectre, Skyfall in particular, and I feel like the treatment of women kind of started off quite well and then took a nosedive and then sort of recovered throughout the Daniel Craig era.
Yes, they did seem to drop the ball a little bit in the middle, but at the same time, I've got such a soft spot for Madeleine Swan, for Vesper. They are completely iconic in their strength of character, in that they can be sexy, but at the same time, it's almost an incidental kind of sex appeal, as opposed to in the earlier Bond films where you very clearly have scenes where the characters are just being written to be sexual fantasies, and that's about it.
So if you mention bisexuality in Bond to the person on the street, I think that probably the first thing that they'd think of is that scene in Skyfall. What do you make of that scene?
I adore it. I adore it, because to me it makes perfect sense that a man as confident with everything to do with sex and sexuality would have at least flirted with the idea of being able to turn a man, or to catch a man's eye. I don't believe that Bond is anything but straight, personally, but I do feel that he has enough of an ego to really like the idea. I'm sure he'd love the idea that everybody in the room could find him attractive. That's one of his flaws. His ego is one of those, one of Bond's many flaws. So I reckon he'd love the idea that it wouldn't just be the women. because also he's a man that knows how to use his sexuality and use his sex appeal to get what he wants. He isn't always just sleeping with these women because he's horny. He sometimes sleeps with them for information or to get access to some sort of villain. So it does make sense. But at the same time, again, why they've not shown a bit more of it, it could just be through a glance. They've not even shown men being attracted to Bond, and that puzzles me, because I understand why they might not want to show James Bond being attracted to another man, because if Bond is straight, then there's no real reason necessarily to show that. But to show other people, if he's as magnetic and panther-like and gorgeous as he clearly is presented to women, and how the female characters around him are written, then why not have men falling at his feet as well? Why not have the man making him a drink, slip his number along with the martini? Why not? James Bond doesn't have to say, sure, I'll see you after the drinks. But the fact that he's not come across it, it's like the LGBTQ community don't really exist in the Bond universe, at least not as members of the general public that Bond interacts with.
As you were describing that, the only exemption I could possibly think of, and this might be me projecting a bit here, but is Q, particularly in Spectre, where he just does whatever Bond wants him to do. He does it in Skyfall as well, to an extent, at the risk of his job. And it seems so, Daniel Craig is extra pouty in those scenes. And it seems to me that Q is, and he leaves him the champagne at the end of the film as well, in the ice bucket, which is a fairly romantic gesture in my world anyway. Yeah. That's the only exemption that I can think of.
I mean, I love the idea of the two of them as a couple. I think that's very sweet. With the age difference, with the fact that they are so different in terms of how they see the world. The idea that they might find something attractive within one another is such a sweet idea, isn't it?
Totally. I suppose it's up to us to kind of, try to redress that balance and try to, if the mainstream series aren't going to do it, we'll carry on doing our creative projects to kind of try and put those possibilities in people's heads. You've got an exciting new project on the go, haven't you? So could you tell, you told me all about this, and this sounds like one of those things where why does this not already exist in the world? Because I want to see this documentary. So could you tell everyone about your project that you've got on the go at the moment?
Of course, yes. Well, last year I set up a documentary production company, Flight Path Productions, because I want to create the first ever feature-length documentary looking into the severe imbalance of female representation within pilots, within the global aviation industry. We're not talking just about commercial airlines, we're talking about every single facet of aviation. You find that women are severely underrepresented in the cockpit, in air traffic control, throughout the entire industry. And I started to reach out to pilots in the UK, and then quickly found that this is a global issue, and it's absolutely fascinating. I've learned so much about representation and about equality and about the global imbalance as well. The fact that just based on where you're born can change so much about your opportunities solely based on your gender, especially within a STEM-related industry that's full of men. So it's been a fascinating journey of research over the last year and a half. I've spoken to hundreds at this point, hundreds of pilots from over 50 different countries. So as a company, we've secured access to many locations, to phenomenal, inspiring pilots with incredible stories to share and experiences to tell of. But we are looking to raise our budget in order to get this production off the ground. So we've got a crowdfunding campaign that's currently live on Indiegogo at flightpathproductions.com. That's where you can find our campaign. And I suppose to anybody listening who's interested in helping support equality, this is one very affordable way that you can contribute to something massive, to the first of its kind. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and I was thinking while we were watching License to Queer the other day, you've got a female pilot in there. You've got a little bit of
You do.
representation there,
Yeah.
which is lovely.
Mm.
Which is lovely, but at the same time, so much more can be done to address the imbalance, and starting conversations on a global scale is one way of doing that. So I'm just hoping that we can have success in this campaign, and and hopefully we can put something on the big screen that starts to ask and answer these complicated questions.
As you were talking, I was thinking, I'm trying to think of another female pilot that I've ever seen in any form of media. And I can probably think of one in a musical, and that is about, apart from Pam, as you say, there might be others in, what about Mrs. Bell in Live and Let Die? She's learning,
Yeah,
so she's learning how to fly. There you go.
Yeah.
But
that's
really, she's treated almost like a comic figure in a way.
She is.
So
yeah, it's very much like
a woman learning to fly.
Yes,
You know, I suppose Holly Goodhead knows how to pilot a space shuttle. So
yeah, she does. Pussy Galore is obviously the
of course,
sort of first, the go-to for that sort of representation. But yeah, not an almighty amount of women. I mean, you do see some that are starting to push into mainstream media. Captain Marvel is a pilot.
Oh yeah.
You've also, I believe, got a female pilot in the new Top Gun Maverick.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
Film. Yeah. So we're starting to see a little bit, but at the same time, in order for these sorts of mainstream representations in mainstream media of female pilots to have an effect, it takes a few years to see the knock-on effect of that. It's not necessarily going to be people who see it and are already partway through their training. It'll be the next generation who start to watch these films and see that representation, who then decide to take their education in that trajectory of becoming a pilot. So it's a slow moving barometer of progress.
Indeed. So what's the website again? Because I will put it in the notes for this podcast as well, because it's still got, when this goes out initially, there's still at least a couple of weeks left to donate, which I definitely will be doing myself.
Well,
so what's the website again?
It's flightpathproductions.com.
Flightpathproductions.com.
Yeah, you can also come say hi to us on TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn. We're all over social, so yeah, be sure to get in touch.
I must follow you on Instagram then. I haven't got as far as TikTok yet. I rely on my nieces to tell me about TikTok. I feel it's something I wouldn't understand, but I will try my best.
I barely understand myself, but thankfully I've got a lovely group of people that help me with it. So I feel
that's good. That's good.
Yeah,
that's good. All right, it's been absolutely lovely talking with you, Kathryn. And I cannot wait to actually meet you again face to face. Maybe by that next time we meet, the champagne bar will be open, and we won't have to slum it with plastic cups.
No, yeah, I think we should make a rule. We can only drink really good drinks out of glass from now on. We've got to set some parameters.
Oh, I know. I'm not a snob, unlike Bond, but even I have limits.
Indeed. It just tastes better.
It does. Completely agree.